Hi, class. This instructor overview will give you information about what is expected in your first group project, which is basically about drama mini films for what we call purpose-driven brand storytelling. I will begin this by explaining why this is so important, where it fits in the funnel that we're talking about in the course of this class, and also some of the reasons why we believe that this is going to be the mainstay of a lot of content being produced over the next decade. So let's dive right into it. Here's where we are in the funnel. Notice like we're getting into the section that's more about brand consideration. So it relates to the like you part of the funnel. Similar to where we talked a lot about the different ways to create emotion. This is also a viable technique for doing that. But in addition to that, it's beginning to trigger a conversation. So we go beyond just brand exposure to where I ignite enough engagement to where you may start considering my brand. I'm leaving with you this is sort of a 5-minute overview of what's going on in this whole field of storytelling. But I want to highlight in this chart a big shift that we're seeing in social media today. You've already read from some of our courseware this field of what we call infobesity. Basically, we have so much clutter in the world with about half the world being on social media, it's almost impossible to have people identify with your brand. We did already discuss about there's ways to build trustworthy content. There's ways of getting people to ultimately know you over time by addressing their pain points. And then there's a variety of ways to get people to like you because you tugged at their heartstrings. Okay, so we are looking at different methods to start the process of getting people to see you. But it may be more than just forms of entertainment, what we call hedonic pleasure. When you think about like the first generation of social media, it was more about entertainment in the form of humor. So any kind of fun, pleasure, in some cases, it might be just relaxing you, scenes of serenity, for example, contentment. Okay. But that's not enough today. Now, what we have found is that for Gen Z and the younger millennials, there's far more demand placed on content that they see as meaningful, purpose-driven, and helping them with their own personal growth. So this could frustrate a lot of brands saying, well, where do I fit? Eventually I have to sell my product. Don't go that route. We're also hearing that with that same group of individuals, they are putting a premium on brands that show evidence of shared values. Okay, easier said than done. How do you do that? Hey, we stand for whatever. Or maybe you put stamps on your package, show that you're very eco-friendly. All right, that's not working either. So what we're finding is maybe the way we break through the clutter is to get potential fans or prospects to invite us to their communities rather than interrupting their conversations with our ads or even content, which is just the next generation of ads. So how can we do that? Well, we found something very interesting happening around the world, starting with Asia, where stories in the form of mini films, just think of these as like mini movies that happen to have a life lesson to them, might be the best way to show that you share values with your consumers to a point where they want you involved in their conversation, not to talk about your product or service, but to talk about the values that you share. So again, we're still at the top of the funnel. don't feel obliged at that point where you got to say, and if you buy our product, we can save the day. This is not about your solution. This is about your building a bridge with a personal struggle of theirs to show that they're not alone, or don't underestimate some kind of value that you as a brand and that viewer of your video both appreciate. I'll get into all that as I go through some of these examples. But this is what we call eudaimonic storytelling or eudaimonic narratives. The narrative is more about meaning, purpose, personal growth, self-actualization, and less about entertaining you. So what is the overall impact on our social media influence? If you add up all the indirect influences, storytelling doesn't have a direct influence on your social media influence, but it affects your influence indirectly to the degree that it creates inspiration. And by the way, there's also the role of entertainment itself, kind of mediates the impact storytelling has on inspiration that then impacts your social media influence. When you add up all these indirect influences, storytelling accounts for about 7% of your influence. So don't underestimate this. It's an impact on your brand. All right, so let's get into the detail of what's really going on in this field that makes us believe it's worth the investment in these stories, as opposed to, let's say, humorous advertising, or we call creative musings, entertainment forms in the area of performing arts, right? I want you to take a look at this chart. Now, their data stopped at about 2019, but it's enough to show you trends. What I'm trying to show you on this chart is, if you look at, there are 2,800 some videos that garnered over 100,000 views. And we looked at, out of all those videos, where does the preponderance of engagement come from? And so what we're showing here in these light blue lines is the percent that we categorized as fitting brand storytelling. Now, back in 2005, 6, and 7, the engagement was pretty much dominated by humor. And back then, brands were basically just parking their commercials onto YouTube, but that was restricted to whatever limits they had in their spot TV slots. So like 30 seconds to a max of a minute and a half. And then what happened is we noticed a lot of trends coming primarily out of Asia and to a certain extent America, where we realized, we could really lay out a whole story if we had upwards of 3 minutes to as much as 10 minutes. Because in a minute and a half, you can't possibly cover an entire narrative like a mini movie that you're watching, right? Let alone enough to really spark enough emotion for this video to make a difference and to get people to like you, right? But once we start realizing that it's a lot cheaper to create a 3 to 10 minute video, even done professionally, than to host a 30-second to a minute and a half spot TV commercial where the rates are skyrocketing, especially when it comes to the prime TV slots. All right, so that's where brands jumped into it, saying enough of this. And plus the fact that they're recognizing that there's a lot of value in getting the follow-up engagement. Not going to get too much follow-up on a reparked or recasted commercial. People might say, that was funny, I liked it, but you're not necessarily going to get the commentary that leads to a conversation that ultimately leads to their pulling out their wallet to buy your product. All right, well, notice where this ended at the end of our time frame. So let's start out with the solid line here in blue, which is looking at net likes less dislikes. By 2019, it showed that out of all those videos getting over 100,000 views, 61 or 2% fell in the category of brand storytelling. But imagine it's even higher today. The dotted line here is basically doing the same thing for comments. Okay. Now, if you look at views, you may say, well, hold on a second. The views are beginning to really favor, move in a direction favoring brand storytelling, but then it drops. Yes, that's true. And one explanation for that is that humor continues and it's still getting a lot of views, but there's no comments and likes. There's nothing for people to really respond to other than that was funny. All right. So that's just to show you that we're not asking you to move blindly into this direction. The proof is there that this works. Okay. Now, why are some reasons why it works? We did get into this because there's a saturation of content. So it's hard to break through the clutter. Okay. But also, this is a better way to demonstrate your authenticity and build trust because you're allowing characters in your story, though they're fictional, they resemble characters that you're targeting in your audience. And they might relate better to that than, here's a commercial, which is totally unrelated to anything that the viewer is involved with, right? But there's something else there. The storytelling builds trust because an individual could watch scene by scene something in life that they relate to. The alternative is what we call cognitive reasoning. This is the traditional way of advertising where I interrupt your commercial, or your whatever it is you're viewing, and try to make a claim that stop right now and consider why you need to buy my product. Now, the way our brains work in that kind of reasoning is we go through what's called counter arguing. But wait a minute. What about your price? What about the competition? And you're forcing people to rationalize why whatever it is you're trying to sell may be first something they need, let alone something they're interested in buying. Right. But there's a shift that goes on in your brain if I could fully immerse you into a story. Right. So in other words, I'm going to immerse you into suspended reality. Now, your brain's not going to do both. Let me reason why through arguments, as well as getting immersed into what we call narrative processing. It's one or the other. And narrative processing always wins. It leads to a positive outcome. It leads to emotion building. It allows for a moment of reflection when you're done with that narrative. Okay, you don't get that from the cognitive side. So as a result, but a lot of that relates to, I just saw something I could relate to, which makes it more authentic. And consequently, I could trust it. Third, the algorithms like this, because the trailing commentary and the likes and shares, all this engagement is what advertisers want. They see more eyeballs. And then last, this is what many influencers like. Influencers will get pretty tired of seeing your promotions coming their way to where they end up becoming an advertisement in their own right. The stories, if they relate to their own fans, like if your personas kind of match, the characters in your story and your personas match who they try to attract, you're giving them something meaningful to their audience, and they'll like that. Okay. So how's it work? I'm going to take you through 7 key elements to create a whole story. Now I'm doing these sequentially. So I'm encouraging you, don't move ahead. You've got to connect all these dots in sequence. And it begins with the struggles facing your personas. All right. Now, struggles could be measured in many different ways, but I think it comes down to these 3 that are important in starting your whole, let's call it a storyline. Okay? Is there a common thread of obstacles across all your personas you want to target? You won't find a common thread across every single one of your personas. That's a case where you're trying to reach all and you end up reaching no one, right? So you have to pick which groups do you think would best suit a story. Who would best resonate with it? And out of the 16 that all of you have, you rarely see more than about 5 of them. Okay. And can you see that persona being portrayed in what we call a hero's journey? And I'll get into that a little bit more detail. And I'll show you an example with a fitness center. But the hero's journey is basically starting out with someone you perceive as an underdog that has a deep problem to overcome. And they end up succeeding with a lot of rising tension to where you admire this person and they win out. And then there's a moral of the story at the end. Okay, you're going to find with a lot of your personas that doesn't resonate. Okay, I have a specific group I'll talk about in the case of a fitness center that I'll represent as a business. And then there's some dot connecting at this stage too, like, all right, but do I see identifiable characters that could effectively represent all those struggles? You know, if they cross too many different lifestyles and genders and things like that, it's going to be hard to pull it off. So I want you to kind of go through all these steps before you say, this is my struggle that will start my story. All right, so I'm leaving this template with you. By the way, when you click on this over here, it'll take you into your persona descriptions in the event that you haven't saved them. Okay. The other thing I want to mention here is this is just a template for you. If you find another way to do that, that's fine. But for those of you who are saying it's not clear what I want, I'm going to show you this template and explaining my example. I happen to break it down into 3 different subsections. So in my case, I have slide 1A, B, C. You might do it all in one slide. All right, first thing I looked at was what is a common obstacle I find across each one of these personas. I instantly ruled out a group over here called the conspicuous physiques, because I realized that their struggle is kind of self-serving. I don't see it actually fitting a story. Even this one here called optimal performance, like the extreme sports enthusiasts. Okay, I don't see a struggle that they have with somebody who's way overweight, somebody who's losing their self-esteem for some reason, maybe a different life transition is making them question their attractiveness or what have you. But starting out this whole process with, are there some commonalities across people I could see in a story? I came up with this analysis. I saw a number, and it ended up being these 5 that I've squared, where there's energy and identity challenges. Okay, not enough hours in the day. They're wrestling with aging effects. They're balancing their personal standards with changing abilities. Okay, there's a chronic energy drain they have from their daily responsibilities, etc. Then within these groups, there's also this need to want to connect and get support from others. They don't want to do it alone. I don't want just a home gym. Okay, and some of the struggles related to progress and adaptation. So in other words, some people want to maintain the momentum but they don't have a clear direction. So the support group may help them get there, right? And maybe machines that they use are going to give them metrics to demonstrate progress, right? So what I found so far was this is enough for me to say the struggle I see is depleting vitality while juggling changing demands. All right. I went through the test of let's take a look at each one of those personas and see if there's a potential hero journey. Is it suitable for underdogs? And I went through one at a time. Well, this group I have, persona called collective motivators, the journey would be from isolation to community connection. For the productivity boosters, it would be from being overwhelmed to purposeful prioritization. Confidence builders from self-doubt to self-acceptance, etc. So I see my selected 5 personas all kind of providing a path or an ability to display a hero's journey. Now, the rest kind of related to eventually I got to think about how my business could provide messaging. Definitely, I saw one in the form of it's support-centric messaging. For example, like professional guidance that might be valued by the forever durables is one of the personas. The progress philosophy. We're not a boot camp. Okay. This is going to be very relevant to the confidence builders and productivity boosters. Now, some of the messaging kind of relates to what I see in characters that I could portray. Yes, I definitely see like middle-aged, older adults. I think it's going to resonate with those that are career focused, those seeking fresh starts after some life change, like got divorced, lost a spouse, lost my job, gained too much weight, things like that. Okay. So this is sort of an added exercise I use for myself just as a final litmus test. In other words, do I really have the capacity for connecting with and messaging my target audience facing a common group of struggles? It's a lot, it's conceptual. I recognize that. But if you don't get to this point where you have a crisp understanding of a struggle, otherwise called pain points, it's going to ruin the rest of your story building. All right, now with that, I want to start looking at, are there themes? Well, if you looked at the flip book or the PDF version of that, and you go to pages 53 to 66, it talks about 10 different themes. And then within each one of these themes, it gives you some specific motifs. For example, like theme on noble acts of altruism. There's motifs like, well, there's these stories about unexpected kindness. There's a motif about pro-social behaviors, a motif about fostering generous communities, etc. So use those as a guideline to thinking, okay, which one of these might really resonate with my persona? Now, as I mentioned in the live Zoom, your first choice should be between whether you see a value that's motivational, like we call it self-actualizing values, like this is all about getting you to do something, versus relational. I'm not proposing that you change your lifestyle. I'm just here to tell you that you're not alone. Help is at your side. Okay. That will help at start. But this is where I would encourage you to use ChatGPT, OpenAI. I use one that's called Claude, and I'm giving you a separate template on how you could load in. These are all my personas, like this. These are the personas that I picked. And these are the detailed descriptions of all the different themes that I could consider. This is where I think AI will help you a lot, because there's a permutation of too many combinations here. And I think it will frustrate your critical thinking. So basically, you're telling AI, I have these personas, I have all these different unimotic narrative themes, and I'll do the wording for you. Which one of these do you think these themes would resonate best for the collection of my 5 personas? Now, I used 2 different AI sources. They came up with 2 different answers, but they gave a lot of information on why. And then eventually I came up with my first crack at, okay, I think you're telling me that building compassionate connections might be the best one for me to address the struggles faced by my targeted personas. All right. So then what I really want to do is I want to go through like a litmus test. Okay, let's make sure that this would really work. So building compassionate connections, here's a description of it. And what I found was that the theme did resonate strongly with most of the personas. And I basically analyze this further from the standpoint of the motifs. So on I think it's page 60, where they talk about building compassionate connections. I saw themes like ripple of kindness, restoring frayed bonds, embracing personal differences, welcoming acceptance, etc., fit very well with all these different personas. Now, I'll leave it to you, but in my case, I had to say, well, let me play out what would be the struggle. Well, with the forever durables, they struggle with wrestling with aging effects on performance and maintaining vitality. That really fits this motif of ripple of kindness and restoring frayed bonds. Here's those descriptions. So I felt confident saying, I think I'd be heading down the right path if I pick building compassionate connections and going after these 5 personas. Now, to really nail it, because I feel like, but I really don't have enough yet to know how to draft a story, my first crack at it. So I went through those different motifs, ripple of kindness, restoring frayed bonds, and all that. And in the flip book, it'll give you, here are examples of the highest performing videos in each one of those motifs. And I started clicking on them and I said, you know what? I see something in common here. I found one with Prega News, one with Global Telecom, one with Facebook. And they tend to be about people that feel like they're overwhelmed. They're in career bound settings, like balancing too much. And so I looked at the metrics. Wow, 10 million views, 19 million, 24 million, a lot of comments, thousands and thousands of likes. So they're onto something. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. I'll go with what one of those narratives already showed can really work. All right. Now, before I get into, well, here's a slogan I would use, and here's a storyline, characters, all that stuff, I want to start examining, but what is the outcome life lesson? All right, why is this important? Because at the end of the day, this is about demonstrating your values, and that the values that are cherished by your targeted audience are common to your claim for values, right? How do you do that? One way is there a caption at the end, like a slogan that says, here's a life lesson. Let the life lesson show you what's valuable. I just happen to depict it in the form of a story, which you should give me credit for. In other words, that recognition of this value should transfer to me. This is what I stand for as a brand, and there's plenty of evidence on that, right? So let's think about how this is done, but I'm not going to have you jump right into a slogan. There's other dots that connect, but let's just look at how do you come up with this outcome? Well, I would start with that overall struggle, which we showed here, okay, which is giving me an idea of the theme. I'm saying building compassionate connections. Checked it out. It fits all my personas. All right. Now that's step one. The second step is, this is where you need to just come up with a synopsis. Here's my first crack at a very brief summary of how I see this story developing. And it's also a good common ground for all your group members, where you all say, okay, do we agree? Or we get into the detail, who does what and story, etc. But in 50 words max, this is what we think the story should be about. All right. That's going to lead to your moral of the story, which then leads to your implied brand value. So let me show you how that can work. The synopsis I would have for my story, this fitness center one, was the story dramatizes an overworked mom about to arrive late again to a board meeting. On the way, she's horrified over thinking her child was left at home. Relieved to find it was her husband's turn, her peers then surprise her with the company daycare. All right, that's enough for me to get started. Okay, I'm giving you a lot of different examples here of how you can craft a story synopsis, starting with this basically a motif. So what I would recommend here is, go through a few of these. And I'm not saying like there's a total of about 3, 4, 5, 6, almost about 20 examples that I'm giving you. You don't have to go through that many, but you may have your idea on a certain type of motif. Like maybe it's related to breaking norms, rising above mockery, or something like that. Okay, and click on this one here, the one from Samsung, and it gives you an idea. Here's their synopsis. Story dramatizes a shy boy hooked on Kenny G, who's mocked for his quirks. He surprises kids with his saxophone music. Okay, so you have enough examples here to know how to craft a synopsis. Now, from that synopsis, you should have enough to put together that moral of the story. Some people call it moral gist of the story. And now you have the groundwork for here's my implied brand value. Okay, that's your holy grail. I would recommend go through at least 3 or 4 of these. Here's one here by True Move. Here's the story synopsis. Now, the synopsis here, this is a story that dramatizes the courage of a prison warrior aided by the help of a woman who doesn't say anything, but she actually risks her life to help the prisoner. At the end, it says compassion is a true form of communication. All right. What I would say after you read that story is the moral of the story was actions speak louder than words. And the implied brand value there is compassion. Go through another one. This one led to the moral of the story was sometimes the smallest gestures can be the most refreshing. And the implied value is giving. Okay, here's another one. Your efforts and care can turn someone's life around. The brand value there, implied brand value would be make a difference. It might be strength of character, empowerment, empathy, embracement, giving. Okay, so you have to go through each one of these steps. Here's my narrative. From there, I have enough of a beginning part of a story called story synopsis. Here's what I believe would be a good life lesson or moral of the story. And now I could stake claim to this is what my brand stands for. All right, so I told you about the story that I had envisioned for this woman, about to arrive late again to a board meeting, etc. And the way she's horrified to think she left her child at home, etc. Okay, I would say the moral of that story would be never underestimate others' willingness to help you balance your work and life stress. Now, you don't have to do this alone. Okay. And the implied brand value there, I would say, is supportive empowerment, not just empowerment, like just do it, not just supportive. We're there to, comfort you. It's supportive empowerment. I think that story would be enough for me to make that claim. My brand is supportive empowerment. Okay. Now, the next step I really want is before I kind of play out all the pieces of this story in a form of what we call a storyboard, is what are the reasons to participate in this commentary? So, in other words, I can have a great opportunity to show value, but your content doesn't do anything to drive conversation. If at the end of the day, you're not getting hundreds, if not thousands of comments, people commenting on other people's comments, this could be a waste of time. Remember, this whole thing here is not only to spark the attention of strangers, but to get the conversation going in a direction to where they would see you as, wow, this brand fits our community. What you are doing or demonstrating in this story resonates with a personal struggle I have. Okay, take a look at it. I want you to go through all 4 of these. They average out about 3 minutes to 4 minutes, maybe. And I have different themes. One was that noble acts of altruism. One is advancing universal well-being, strengthening lifelong family ties, indomitable quest to soar. But these are ones with, very high views, 17 million, 112 million, 25 million, 9 million, etc. They perform extremely well on likes, but most importantly, comments. Now, what I want you to see a lot of these comments is, can you get comments off the comments? Now you got a conversation with you as a brand, you can let go. And really, the facilitators or the proponents of your brand are the people in that conversation. Let them speak on your behalf. And so you see some of these figures here, like here's one, somebody left a comment, and then there were not only like 8.5 or 8,500 likes, but there was 116 replies just to that one person's comment, right? That's ideal. So in the flipbook, it demonstrates, okay, kind of comment to all these that perform real well in the comments. We're addressing either some aspect of personal growth, sharing a personal struggle. One of these is basically guilt-driven. I wish I had the time to do this. Okay. There's a number of ways to craft your story to bring out that personal growth, sharing a personal struggle, etc. So make sure you take a look at that in the flipbook. Okay, now I would say, like in the case of my fitness center, um, story I have is kind of modeled very similar to what you saw with the Dove Beauty Secret example in an earlier class. The fitness center has potential to deeply resonate with many women like the Dove that were featured in Dove's Real Beauty sketches. Sheds light on their challenges in making ends meet, often resulting in emotional and mental exhaustion. Responses are likely to include other individuals sharing similar experiences, discussing their coping strategies, or voicing frustrations about inequitable circumstances. Okay. So I think I've got plenty with the story to drive an ongoing, very dynamic discussion. All right. So I'm asking you to kind of describe yours in the same way. Try to do this in, less than 50 words. All right. Now I think we got all the pieces for, let's come up with that inspirational message. Some call it a tagline, some call it a slogan. All right. Here's a great one to start with. So I'm encouraging you to click on this one here from Shangri-La. Now, Shangri-La is give you kind of in a nutshell, this is a story of a young man who got caught in a winter storm blizzard on cross-country skis, lost his way in a blizzard, and is hitting a point of exhaustion where he collapses. And in the distance, he can hear the wolves beginning to surround him. Next scene shows the wolves are totally comforting this boy. And the slogan says, to embrace a stranger as one's own, it's in our nature. Perfect. Shangri-La is an international hotel that wants to distinguish itself with inclusion. In other words, that is their mark of distinction. We accept everybody. All right. What a better way to do it than to say to embrace a stranger as our own? It's in our nature. It's in Shangri-La's nature. And now people will see this as, wow, this must be a very welcoming hotel, as opposed to traditional ads. There's a Shangri-La hotel. You should know that, if you make your accommodations close to us, you won't run into these struggles like getting caught in a mountain with wolves. All right. So this is all about, this is a value that we espouse, to point that it's portrayed in this riveting mini film. All right. Now, the way I kind of start this process is, similar to we talked about the values, there was kind of like a motivational part called self-actualizing. Then there was another part that's more relational, that's more of support group oriented. Okay. Your slogans kind of work in the same way. They tend to be either aspects of wisdom, like sometimes it's a metaphor about life or about personal attitudes, or it could be advice. Think of the advice is more inspirational, motivational, do something. All right, let's start out with this first one would be more the relational. It's perspective. Like count your blessings would be sort of a relationally oriented slogan. There's some here like the greatest blessing has always been by your side. Embrace a stranger as one. So it's in our nature would be an example of that. Bold is beautiful. You can lift the weight of caring by doing. Time to come home. Gratitude makes the impossible happen. Okay. So those are examples where a slogan that's more about perspective, reflect on your life and count your blessings, so to speak. But it could be motivational. And that would show up in your first word as a verb. Break free. Show them you know them. Pursue more from life. Let's widen our screen so we can widen our view. Belong anywhere. It's Airbnb. Okay, start out with an action verb, and that's saying, look, act. All right, so I'm kind of leaving you with, we call this the compass of wisdom. All right, take a look at these four, which I think are very representative of the different aspects of either wisdom or something that's advice oriented. All right, and if you look at the four different quadrants, then they tend to be either about family. Here's one with Coke. Give something you can give. This is a good one to view on P&G. It's wisdom is inspirational. In other words, do something. And I think the slogan was, it takes someone strong to make someone strong. Okay. This one here, where the nature of advice is kind of more behavioral, but the wisdom is virtuous. In other words, do good deeds. As opposed to here, it's more reflective. Okay. So the tagline here was, no matter how difficult the path gets, God always shows the right way to everyone. Here's the one where you probably saw already on Adidas, break free. All right. So the different quadrants lead to, you tend to have slogans that are either about family, aspiration, love, and courage. And they tend to be either wisdom then on values, wisdom about a life metaphor, goodness is, life is, home is, relationships are about, etc. Or if it's advice, it tends to be either inspirational, empower yourself, make a difference, or virtuous, do good things in life. Okay. Now, I don't think you have to get into too much detail. There's a sort of like a mini science behind just a slogan development, but you can do it. I mean, you have enough to at least get started if you connect a lot of those dots. All right. But start out with, so pick one of those messages, either the family, love, aspiration, or courage. Okay. And then draft your first one. Okay. Now I'm giving you some hints to start with. So the Shangri-La, I'm saying, here's a tagline they used. Theirs happened to be wisdom about, and I picked the values and attitudes I think would fit the best. Now, your next question though is does it really resonate with the struggles of your targeted personas? Okay. And then does it resonate with the moral of the story, which you already developed? Does it resonate with the implied brand values you claim you have? And kind of connect all the dots here, right? So now I should have all the pieces. I know the type of messaging. I want it to be about love, and it's going to be imparted wisdom. And I see how it fits my personas, the moral of the story I've crafted, the implied brand value, but also it's relevant to the nature of my brand's business. So for example, Dodge says to the farmer and all of us, and Dove Beauty Secret says, you're more beautiful than you think. I wouldn't switch those. I don't think for Dodge, you can say you're more beautiful than you think, nor can you say that to the farmer and all of us for Dove, all right? So you don't craft it to promote your product, but make sure it's relatable to the nature of your business. All right, now I went through this process myself in trying to craft a slogan I thought would fit for the fitness center. You may not have to go through this much detail, but I had to go through this detail because I found this, it's not a dichotomy, but a problem between selecting my theme of building compassionate connections and a path to self-realization. There's this woman, I want to encourage her. Don't let this setback, thinking that you left your child behind, ruin you. But then on the other hand, don't underestimate the support you're going to get around people that are noticing your efforts. So where do I take it? Well, let's look at both. Now, then I just went to Google and I said, show me quotes, different quotes on each aspect. Okay, value moving forward. I said, here are some quotes to consider. Okay, and then the assurance that others are on your side. I saw one quote that's like, you'll be amazed what you attract when you start believing in what you deserve, things like that. So I started joining them together to where I finally came up with, I think, a combination of both. It's something to do with well done is better than well timed, maybe. But I finally came up with, when resolve shines, kindred spirits light the way. Some may argue that's a little bit too wordy. I found that if I made it shorter, it got too ambiguous. So I'm leaving that for you to decide. But here's a good litmus test when you're done. Is it really relevant to the targeted persona? I think so. Because when I say when resolve shines, kindred spirits light the way, that kind of fits with my target personas that are all about like New Year's resolutions, and they just struggle to push past those first few attempts. So I could see it kind of resonating. It's relevant to the moral of the story that I found, because it fits that theme of being assured your progress is being noticed and everything is okay. It is irrelevant to the brand value. Remember my brand value of supportive empowerment. It's basically saying, don't be afraid to add, or just don't be afraid. Okay. So when I say when resolve shines, kindred spirits light the way. Okay, that's covering both the supportive side and the empowerment side. And is it relevant to the brand's line of business? Yeah, I think it fits the disciplinary push of fitness centers. Right. Not saying you have to go through all that, but for me, that was enough to say, I think I'm onto something with the slogan, and I connected the other dots, applied value, etc. Now I start putting together the story. Now, stories work in what we call a dramatic arc. Some call it a story arc. It's typically about an underdog that I really start rooting for. They face some tension, but wait, it gets worse. But wait, it gets even worse. And I left you guys with an example of what I did. I thought I'd walk the talk a little bit, but I did a story about NSU and our roots, and it highlights in there, okay, just when you thought it got bad, it gets worse and worse and worse, just to give you an idea of it. All right. So what you're trying to do here is you have to have this early tension. It's got to be severe and dramatic, or you will not get the 6 million views, let alone the likes on, to really get people to stop what they're doing and comment on what you're doing. Don't water it down. You won't get more than 1,000 views. Okay. So create some suspense, make it tense, and then show the progress of it leading to this rising action. Okay. Now, so continuous obstacles, like wait, it gets worse and worse and worse, are needed for a number of reasons. It builds that distress and suspense that most of us can equate to the best movies we've ever seen, right? In other words, it's not like a cereal commercial where it starts out happy and ends happy. It starts out really depressing or fearful or anger, and then gradually the person overcomes. And this is what it takes to arouse empathy. Okay. And then it also encourages people to stay to the end. All right. So you start with that incident of high tension. Now I'm leaving it with you guys how you want to portray this. Back in my early days dealing with the advertising agents and clients, we used to put together like this pencil stitched drawings to say, this is what we envision, and we talk on it. You don't want to go much further than that because you're not sure that they will appreciate the whole video. So you don't create a video, at least not at this stage. You could do this, by the way, just by taking pictures and then running it through. If you go under artistic effects in PowerPoint and you click on the one that's called pencil, it'll give you this kind of drawing. All right. And then just, brief sentence. In this case, I'm saying, okay, after rushing her family to breakfast, I envision a woman hustling off to work to avoid another late board meeting arrival. When she stops at a streetlight, she adjusts her rearview mirror only to discover her child's not in the car seat. So it's got to be that drastic. Okay. Now I want to go through the rest of the story arc, and I'm basically asking you guys, complete these pieces: exposition, brief beginning. What we just talked about was the conflict, etc. And I'll give you an example of how I would do all these in the case of the fitness center, and it'd be kind of along these lines. So we talked about the incident, right? Then it continues the rising action. Horrified that she forgot to drop her child off at daycare, she makes a quick U-turn and alerts her husband of the mistake. He then reminds her that it was his turn to drop off the child. Sobbing over the disarray and likelihood of being late again, she arrives to the boardroom meeting and is told to follow some HR personnel. They inform her on the way that the leadership recognizes her struggle to balance her personal and professional life. Okay, that's your rising action. Oh no, she's going to get fired. Okay, now the climax. As they turn down the hallway, okay, this area here, she notices a large office under renovation. The escort team then surprises her with a door sign for the company's newly opened daycare center. All right. Now, the falling action is also called the denouement, or leads to the denouement, is they lead her back to the boardroom where the CEO explains that success in a company usually comes to those who are too busy to be looking for it. The rest of the executives stand to applaud her. Okay, then that would lead into the slogan that I mentioned. All right. Now, this again, line sketches are fine, however you guys want to do it. I basically went to ChatGPT and said, showing a picture of a woman doing such and such, and it basically gave me the entire collage. All right, now the last thing is connecting all the dots. So I'm giving you 3 different examples. Hopefully you have gone to the video about Etika. And now that I have all these different pieces, I want to make sure, does the moral of the story really line up with the tagline or slogan? Does it line up with the nature of the business, the targeted personas I have? Does the tagline line up with the business? Does the tagline line up with its persona? Does the portray protagonist, the main character, line up with the personas, etc.? And here's 2 more examples you should be familiar with now. One is Dove Beauty Secrets, and the one about Dodge and the farmers. Okay, so that's giving you enough as a start. So just kind of, fill it in. This is a template you can use. And kind of wrap it up with, here's what I did then in the case of the fitness center, to where I'm pretty comfortable that I've connected all the dots. Story I saw, the characters I saw, I resonate with their struggles. I understand the moral of the story. It seems to resonate even further with, or it seems to be reinforced even further with your slogan, everything connects. All right. So here's this is the rubric I want you guys to follow. There's basically one for each one of those slides. And again, you can have different slides. I'm just giving you an example so here's how I would answer it. You may have more slides. You may do it in less slides. Okay. I am giving a little bit more point count to like the thematic tie-in and the outcome life lesson. I think that's the more challenging part. Okay. But wish you guys well on it, and give me a call if you want a quick preview, just to make sure that you're heading in the right direction. By the way, there is no live preview presentation. A written presentation will work. All right. Thank you.